Welcome to week 7 of the Transitioning to Organic webinar series for crop producers. We have two fabulous speakers today who will be discussing cover crops, concluding our 3-part series on building soil health in transitioning soils. This series is a collaboration between Community Alliance with Family Farmers, UC Cooperative Extension, and the UC Organic Agriculture Institute. I'm Grace Jackson, Farmer Services Central Valley Regional Lead at CAFF. Margaret Lloyd, the Cooperative Extension Farm Advisor for Organic Agriculture and Small Farms, will be joining us next week. And I'm going to pass it over to Katharina Ullman to introduce herself.
Hi, everyone. So nice to see so many familiar names out there. Along with Margaret and Grace, I'm one of the co-organizers of this webinar series. I am the Training and Technical Assistance Coordinator with the UC Organic Agriculture Institute. We are so grateful that you are here with us today and very excited about this session on cover crops. I'll pass it back to you, Grace.
Thanks, Katharina. A quick thank you to our funders for making this possible, the CDFA Office of Agricultural Resilience and Sustainability, CDFA's State Organic Program, and the USDA Transition to Organic Partnership Program. We're following a very similar structure as we did the past 6 weeks. So we will start presentations very shortly. We will end those and do some Q&A for hopefully around 10 minutes, around 1 o'clock. We will have a closing poll as usual and conclude the formal webinar presentation part of this of today around 1:15. And then we will open office hours, and office hours will be a time for continued Q&A with our speakers, and office hours will go from 1:15 till about 2. At the end of each week, you'll get an email recapping the weekly webinar and providing follow-up resources through the resource guide. So please check out the resource guide in the email. You can find Zoom links, presentation, PDFs, additional resources, and the optional OSP homework if you're following along with us and making some progress on your OSP throughout this series. Now I'm going to pass it off again to Katharina to introduce our speakers.
Thanks so much, Grace. So we are in week 7 of this 10-week series. Today we're going to be speaking about cover crops. This is the last part of our soil health series, and I'm really excited to be able to introduce these two fantastic speakers. Sarah Light, and Grace, if you could switch to the next slide, please. Sarah Light has served as an agronomy farm advisor since 2017. Her research program focuses on nutrient management, field crop production, and soil health with an emphasis on cover crops. She is the current president of the Western Cover Crops Council. So welcome, Sarah. We're so happy to have you here. With Sarah, we have Brian Park. Brian is an organic farmer in Sutter County, growing diversified row and field crops. We heard from his father, Scott Park, a couple of weeks ago. Brian owns Park Farming Organics, which is a regenerative organic certified farm. So with that, I'll pass it over to Sarah and Brian to share their screen and kick off this presentation. And we can see your slides perfectly, Sarah.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having us. I guess we were just introduced, so we can jump right in. So just to start with the big picture of cover cropping, some high-level considerations. Cover crops are a necessity in organic production. and should be managed like a field crop. Set yourself up for success by really considering the cover crop and making sure the field and the stand are consistent and using GPS so that you can get a good stand establishment and good planting. And then picking a cover crop that you can terminate in the spring no matter what is really critical. We are going to talk about cover crop selection and termination, but really considering the end in the beginning when you're doing the selection is very important to make it an enjoyable experience or a not very stressful experience in the spring. Controlled traffic farming is kind of a component of regenerative agriculture and of maintaining good soil health. What controlled traffic farming means is that you have permanent beds and permanent drive rows, so you don't work up the whole field at the same time. You always drive in the same place, restricting your compaction to that kind of zone. And you need GPS on all your equipment in order to be able to accomplish that. So integrating cover crops and controlled traffic farming can be great if it's possible with your operation and equipment. We've structured our talk kind of to cover the sequentially the cover crop season. So we're going to start with considerations for planting and establishment. Then we'll move into in-season observations, and we'll end with termination and conclude with some considerations and kind of summary conclusions. Oops.
So, yeah, how do you decide what cover crop mix or species you're going to grow? There's a lot of different considerations to give. I guess, in my opinion, the biggest one is what cash crop, what cover crop are you going to grow? Depends on what cash crop you're going to be going into the following season. And so like for ourselves, vetch is an easy one. It's predictable, it's a legume, and it terminates pretty easily in the spring. So like we'll use common vetch or purple vetch for early season cash crops like tomatoes, corn, sunflower, something that's going to be planted in, end of March, beginning of April timeframe. And then we'll use more of a mix or a blend of like oats, peas, radish, vetch for our later cash crops, like dry beans, squash, watermelon, rice. Yeah, that's good. So and then the selection and profitability during transition to organic. I actually have so we've transitioned a lot of fields over the years, and trying to stay somewhat profitable during those years can be challenging. Currently, for example, the state of conventional commodities that we would typically use for transition crops like a wheat or a safflower or a sunflower, things that are low risk, low input. The prices are really, really, really down right now. And so we actually have kind of pivoted to planting a alfalfa crop that will take the hay off of that for the next 3 years, and I think that's going to be better. It'll end up being good for the ground, and so I guess the point of it is that cover crops are good, but at the end of the day, each business has to keep the doors open, and currently for us, an alfalfa cover crop or transition crop seems to be the ticket. What else am I missing?
You're certified organic. Or...
Yeah, no, I think that's good.
Okay, next one.
Yeah. So yeah, and then mitigating risk during those 3 years is key. The slide that we have in front of you now is an example of one of our, wouldn't consider it a nemesis, but a cover crop that has given us quite a few headaches over the years. That's triticale. A lot of folks, organically speaking, triticale is tough because if you can't get in and terminate it when you want early in the spring, the root balls can be problematic going forward. And so while it's probably really, really good for the soil, just be cognizant of the fact that if you're in a row crop setting, it can be difficult to keep, a bed in order. And the picture on the right is a picture of a walnut orchard that, after a couple inches of rain, had a lot of runoff, and something that we don't like to see. Where it's hopefully when you get into cover cropping, you won't see as much of that runoff.
Great. So I'm going to actually stop sharing my screen and transition to just quickly showcasing a cover crop species selector tool that can be helpful for new cover crop users or experienced users who want to try something new. Here's the QR code in the website, and we'll have that in our final slide as well. So let me jump over here. So this is the Western Cover Crops Council website. Brian is a member of our Southwest Committee for the Cover Crop Council, and definitely encourage anyone interested in cover cropping to join. It's a free membership, and we really don't email much, so a good way to kind of stay abreast of what's going on. I wanted to just show on our homepage this cover crop resources tab that has resources organized by different topics. Brian and I are both annual crop people, so we're going to talk a lot about annual crops, but I saw that there are a lot of perennial growers on this webinar. There are resources here for you, and the selector tool is also relevant for all cropping systems. To access the selector tool, you can get to it from the Western Cover Crops Council website under Decision Tools, and then just click Try the Species Selector tool, or you can go directly to covercrop-selector.org. This is a national tool. The Western Cover Crops Council led the data verification for the 13 states in the Western United States. But this was a joint effort with the USDA NRCS, which funded the project, as well as the Precision Sustainable Agriculture Group, led by Stephen Mirsky, who's at USDA ARS. And they helped us with organizing our data and data stewardship in a way that could be used for the selector tool, as well as creating the website and putting our data in. So we're really grateful for that collaborative opportunity. So very important to start with the state that you're in. Everything was vetted by local experts for this tool, including the species that should be included. And so in California, we had a few native species that we included because that was, those are, some of them are used here, particularly in perennial systems. However, in the other states in the West, it's less common, so they don't have those in theirs. There are two main functionalities of the tool. One is as a very comprehensive cover crop database. You access that by pressing this button here, Browse Cover Crops, and then it'll just bring up all the species in whatever state you're in. If you're elsewhere, you can pick a different state outside of California. And here's California poppy, one of the native species, baby blue eyes, another. And then all the species that alfalfa, which Brian mentioned, is a good transition opportunity. All the species included in the state are listed here, or for whatever state you're in. And then if you click on that, one of the individual species, it'll take you to this database. Photos, more than one photo if we have them, a brief description, basic agronomics of how this cover crop grows, environmental tolerances. So along the lines of managing your cover crop like a cash crop, this is helpful to consider as you're picking one, so you can pick one that will grow well in your area, in your field. And if you have salinity or some other challenge, that you can adjust for. It does show how this species ranks for the 13 goals in the tool, and then has any notes that were available. So this data set was created through a combination of tactics. One was a comprehensive literature review and extensive research on what had been done in California, in other parts of the country, in other areas, and what they had found. And that was what we used as our baseline. And then we verified the data for all the parts of the West at the all West level, the state level, and then the ecoregion level. And that allowed us to capture regional considerations, climatic considerations, production system considerations. And so along those lines, we put in any notes that are to consider. So cowpeas can attract beneficial predators. Sometimes we do have notes about attracting pest insects, because growers do have questions about that. Is this going to bring something that'll move into my neighboring crop? So everything available is really included here. Growth type, planting, including seeding rates, depth of seeding planting, soil conditions, and then finally termination. So that's the database functionality. The other really quick functionality of this tool is get a recommendation. To do that, this is where you use it as more of a species selector, and it's not as much just browsing, but more tailored to your needs. So you can either drag the pin to your location if you're near Sacramento, or you can put in your address. I'm just going to drag to this random field in Yolo County for this purposes. The reason selecting your site is important is because it'll draw soil composition and any environmental information from Web Soil Survey and weather data. However, if your drainage class is different than what it auto-selects, please adjust that for your field. You'll know your field better than the auto population component. And then it allows you to pick up to 3 goals. The first goal that you pick is the goal that kind of sorts the heaviest. And so you can always reorder your goals if it's binning them a little bit weird, but I do like to kind of draw attention to that because we've had some questions from users, and it's really often because the first goal is limiting. But let's say you're most interested in weed suppression, and then your second goal is reducing compaction. You want to pick the planting season. So in an annual system in the Sacramento Valley, fall is quite common. And then if you're going to irrigate or not. And then if you're a perennial grower or an annual grower, you can select that. This is really when you don't want to have a cover cropping conflict is where that comes in. So if you're doing an annual system, let's say you're planting mid to end of April, let's say you're harvesting sometime in August. And then next, what it'll do there is it'll basically show in orange your cash crop growing season. So in a perennial system, that's again when you don't want to have a cover crop there. The reason for that is it can then block off the conflict, and it'll gray out species that can't be reliably established in your season because you need to plant them at the time when your cash crop is in the ground, or when you're in a perennial system, don't want a cover crop there. So that's what that looks like. And then you can sort the results by goals 1 and goals 2. If you have 3 goals, you can sort them and kind of find a few that seem like they're ranking high for your goals. I will say that these are relative rankings based on expert knowledge. And so it's essentially saying that in this area for this goal, these cover crops will do better or worse than others, but they're not relative values. So it's not going to say you're going to get this amount of biomass, but rather that you're going to get more biomass than with a different species. You can filter further by different considerations or agronomics, like growth habit, life cycle, many other considerations. And then from here, you can click on the species and it'll take you right to that same database entry. So you can browse from there. Definitely encourage new users to the tool to not oversort. I think it can be really fun to go through and say, oh, I want this C to N ratio, this growth habit, this life cycle, and this is my exact conditions. If that happens, you might narrow it down too much. And I definitely think that having the opportunity to read about the different species, get into the database, and kind of pick one that works well for you, or a mix that works well for you is helpful. It is just for single species, not for mixes, but definitely can be used to create a mix that'll meet all of your goals. So with that, we're going to jump back into the slides, but just wanted to showcase that resource for people who are interested in selection. And let me share my screen again. Okay, still seeing the right slides here?
Yes, looks great.
Great, thanks. So after you've picked the cover crop that you want to plant, what are the other considerations for what comes next? To inoculate or not, this is for legumes. This is a picture of a cover crop seed mix in the seed hopper. Inoculants are kind of powdery microbial mixes that can be used to bring rhizobia bacteria in with of a legume that you're planting. They're relatively inexpensive compared to the cost of the cover crop seed and cover crop management. So when Brian and I were talking about it, we were like, yeah, it's not clear if you always need it, but it's a good safety, especially if you're planting a new legume in a new field that might not already have that rhizobia bacteria. The rhizobia work with the legume cover crop in symbiosis to fix nitrogen into the nodules. That's this picture here on the right. And so definitely we do recommend using inoculum for legumes, again, particularly if it's your first time putting that type of legume in the field. You want to just make sure that it has what it needs to fix the nitrogen and do what you'd like it to do. What's a typical way to do it is to put the seeds into the hopper, maybe a third of the seed, sprinkle about a third of the inoculum in the hopper itself, mix it in, put more seed, more inoculum, mix it in, and do that again until it's all mixed in kind of well, and then you just plant from there, and it goes right into the soil altogether. So it's not two passes or anything like that. In terms of ordering seed for organic, if you can use conventional seed as long as it's not treated, but as long as there's a reasonable effort to try to find organic seed, you can't have any pesticides. If you do need certified seed, you might need to give a seed dealer a bit of a heads up because they don't always have that on stock on hand. And then for a custom seed blend, you just want to make sure that you give enough time to get that made. But a lot of times the standard seeds like vetch that are common in the area are less of an issue to try to find. Unless it's a little bit further away and there's some kind of transportation or consideration. And I can put in the chat later, I found a resource from the USDA of cover crop and native seed suppliers in the state of California that was just updated in November. So that can be useful for people who are trying to find a supplier in their area.
Okay, weed management and cover crop establishment. So yeah, there's a lot of different ways to get a cover crop established, and I'm sure as a lot of the audience knows, farming is never perfect. So you kind of have to be able to adapt on how you're going to get this cover crop established. There's kind of a perfect world, a non-perfect world, and maybe an ideal way to do it. But ultimately, after you're done with your summer groundwork and you've kind of set the table for the winter and the following season, beds have been pulled, maybe weeds have been cultivated out. That's when you're going to want to plant your cover crop, and ideally it would be prior to a rain. Sometimes we don't have that luxury. Like for example, this last fall, we had some fields that got harvested just before a rain, and we didn't have the time to get across all of the acres. And so we actually flew on some of our fields. We flew on the cover crop seed and then just rolled them in. It's again, it's not ideal, but it's better than not doing it, I guess, is my opinion on that. The Yeah, and so what else?
Perfect, non-perfect, ideal.
Yeah, yeah, I think we covered that.
Okay.
So yeah, this is kind of back to when to plant. Depending on how large your farm is, we'll plant dry. Um, if you have a number of acres that you're trying to cover, there's nothing wrong with planting it 2 weeks, 3 weeks ahead of time, before rain, so that you can make sure you get across all of the acres that you need to. If you're a smaller farm, then it's maybe it would be ideal to wait, a day or two before a rain's going to come, and then just place that seed a quarter of an inch or half an inch below, depending on, how much what seed it is and how much vigor it has. But there's yeah, it's you just have to be able to adapt, I guess, is kind of the key takeaway. Um, what else? Yeah, I think
Yeah.
we've covered that. Yeah. This is Sarah asked if I had any pictures of things that have gone wrong, and farmers don't like to take a lot of pictures of things that have gone wrong. We're better at taking pictures of things that have gone right. But I did have this in my photos, and so we were behind, and typically we plan everything with a grain drill. We thought we would use our air planter, a monosem, to plant a multi-species. The plates that we used were the whole size was too big to fit all of the different seeds on it, and so we ended up with a bunch of seeds in our manifold, which wasn't ideal, but I guess it's more just a, trial and error. You don't know unless you try, um, and things go wrong. And that's okay. Um,
Good.
yeah,
Yeah.
good.
Okay, good. So, to conclude our establishment section, we're going to talk about just planting equipment. We'll talk about a few different options. This is a no-till drill. This is pretty common in like the Midwest where they do no-till systems, but certainly is not necessary to plant cover crops, but is an example. In a no-till drill, you have these openers or discs in the front that cut a slot through any sod or residue and kind of open up the soil, and then the seed gets dropped down. This picture on the right just gets dropped right into that opening, and then these little feet back here kind of close it up. So sometimes when it's too dry, it can be a little bit harder to get it closed, but it usually does work pretty well. This is a picture of a planting using a no-till drill right into sunflower residue, and so there still are, any weeds that you've put in the field are still there, that you've put in, that have grown in the field are still there. And then this sunflower residue is still on top. So the sunflower just gets kind of knocked right down and stays there. And the cover crop seed is planted in this line that's been opened by the disc. So it's a low disturbance way to plant a cover crop following a cash crop.
So yeah, this is a picture of our grain drill. This is a Great Plains, 15 feet wide. There's 6-inch spacing in between each disc opener. It's got Keaton seed firmers on the back. It's that white finger looking thing that's made out of Teflon that kind of helps press the seed to make sure it gets into contact with the soil. We've had this particular grain drill for going on almost 20 years. I think it's planted a little over 20,000 acres, and yeah, it's simple and gets the job done. Similar to what Sarah was showing you guys earlier, this is just another version of that same planter hooked onto a coulter sled, that we'll use like in a no-till drill application if there's a bunch of biomass on the surface that we need to cut through, and that works really well.
Cool. Okay, so we're going to move on to some in-season observations and considerations.
So here's a picture of that mix I was talking about earlier. There's daikon radish, peas, oats, vetch. Everything's thriving. This is, yeah, probably, I guess what it, it's probably, I would guess, end of January, maybe beginning of February, um, maybe a little bit later. Yeah, so observations, what are we looking at, in season? I guess you're looking at plant vigor. Is there one species that's doing better than the other species? Sometimes we planted like a wheat uh vetch mix, and it's been kind of interesting to watch, as the vetch will take off and it'll look like a vetch field, and you come back a week later, and the wheat has tapped into some of the nitrogen that vetch is fixating, and then it's taking off, and it'll kind of go back and forth. Um, in drought years, as everyone knows, there's, yeah, without without moisture, the cover crops won't do a whole lot, but they also won't um, commit suicide. They'll kind of just sit there and wait until there's enough moisture to take off. So yeah, another observations and some of the benefits that we see on our farm from planting cover crops. It seems like there's waterfowl, ducks, and turkeys take advantage of the different cover crops that we grow, and they seem to be thriving in our area. We work with local nonprofits. If we need to get in and chop a field, then we'll have like a CWA or someone go in ahead of us to check and see if there's any nesting going on, and they'll pick up the eggs and make sure they make it get home safe. And my tractor drivers are also, they are good about stopping if they see something flush up in front of them to make sure we gather the eggs. And then, a pheasant, our area used to have a lot of them. It seems like our surrounding fields are starting to see some come back. And I think part of it is, they've got somewhere to hide, right? It's not just scorched earth everywhere.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, when you showed me this pheasant picture, I was so pleased because in the 8.5 years I've been working this area, I've only seen one pheasant.
right.
And now two with this photo.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
that's cool.
yeah.
Um, Okay, so just to continue with in season, this is a really wet winter. I think this was 2 winters ago. We planted a variety trial demonstration plots at Brian's farm for a field day, and this was probably end of February. And so really good infiltration. It looked like in the field, but some water accumulating here on the side, but definitely cover crops can infiltrate water, move water off the field. And just one comment about dry years, cover crops also can help capture some dew in the canopy. So that is one thing I've observed, that even when it's a really dry February, if you walk through a cover crop field, a lot of times you'll get, your pants will get wet still in the morning because
Right.
it's capturing moisture from the air.
One of these slides you guys have already seen, but I guess I felt it was important to show it again. This side by side was taken the same day, about 10 seconds apart, and the side on the right is one of our organic fields. It's been in organic production for a long time, and it's showing the amount of runoff. This was after about 2 inches of rain, and the walnut orchard could not have had any more water coming off of it. Meanwhile, ours, I guess I'm kind of proud of it to show that it didn't hardly have any water coming off of it. So the field is capturing a lot of that rainfall. It's helping to, go back into our local aquifers. Yeah.
Absolutely, yeah. And you really see it, speaking of perennial systems, just real quick, you really do see it in our area now, driving up, just even up the 99, the orchards that have cover crops or don't, and how much water is sitting in them. It's interesting to see it. Weeds.
Weeds, yes. So yeah, that's one thing our farm seems to specialize in is weeds. We don't have a lot of other problems, but we do have weeds. And so this slide is kind of to show the slide on the right, there's about 6 beds there that we decided not to plant a straight purple vetch into, and to see, a couple of different things, right? What does it look like in the spring when we go into for our normal spring tillage? What's a cash crop? Does it benefit or not? And I think one of the main takeaways for me was that the predictability of knowing what you're going to deal with can mean a lot to a farmer coming into the spring. If you can plant a cover crop that can help shade out weeds, and you know what you're going to deal with that spring, that can mean a lot, versus if you're not planting a cover crop, you're kind of rolling the dice that you'll have maybe an influx of rye or mustards or wild turnips or chickweed and shepherd's person. And sometimes we'll have all of those things alongside with our cover crop. But if you, by planting a cover crop and you get it well established, you can shade out a lot of those obnoxious weeds, and then at least you know what you're dealing with in the spring before you plant a cash crop.
Yep. And then the picture on the left, the picture on the left, my slides are going a little crazy. Sorry, guys. Okay, the picture on the left is of a mix with some a brassica. I think it's a mustard that's set some flowers up. Of course, the flowers are an indication that it's going to set seed soon. And so what happens if you're not ready to terminate your cover crop and you're starting to see that it's starting to go to flower and soon will set seeds? But the field is too wet to terminate, or you want the cover crop to keep growing because you want, you have a late spring planting date and you want it to keep kind of doing some work for you, maintaining soil coverage and a living root. One option is to do a high mow above the cover crop kind of canopy and just cut off that flower stalk before it can set viable seed. That'll help prevent the cover crop from becoming a weed in later years, particularly with brassicas that can create a lot of really small seeds that fly everywhere and are really hard to control later. Definitely recommend a high mow just to get that seed head off before it becomes viable if it's too wet. And
Yeah.
that's, I guess, that.
Yeah. We actually just did this on about 400 acres prior to the different storms that we just had over the last 10 days. And it was, yeah, it was so helpful. We had some fields that had more bull thistle than cover crop, or more mustard than cover crop. And trying to keep those from going to seed is just super duper important.
Yep. Okay, so weeds in season. And then, yeah, more biology.
Well, yeah, so more observations in season. Earthworms seem to thrive when there's something living on the soil coming into the spring, and the ground's starting to warm up. Those are my kids helping me just kind of get a count of how many earthworms we're getting every time we flip a shovel full of soil over. And there's a little lady beetle on the left. Just, yeah, life when you have cover crops incorporated into your system, the everything is happy above ground and underneath ground.
Yep. This is our last kind of in-season slide. This is a summer cover crop, sun hemp, which is a legume. These are actually pictures from Brian of sun hemp after one irrigation and just how much it can grow. So in the summer, if you plant a summer cover crop after an early summer harvest of wheat or something like that, there's so much heat, there's so many heat units that summer cover crop can establish really quickly. But even with a winter cover crop, they do sort of take off as it starts to get a little bit warmer. So it's kind of interesting to observe that for yourself during those different seasons.
Yeah.
Anything on that?
No, other than, yeah, sun hemp is an awesome summer cover crop. If anyone ever has the opportunity after your winter cash crop is off and you have the water available, it doesn't take much. This was a pre-irrigation to get it established, and then one irrigation after that. And Yeah, it's fun to watch it grow.
hmm hmm Okay, so now we move into termination. I think termination is has come up a lot in conversations I've had with growers because when it goes badly, it's really stressful. So that's why we're going to give it proper attention here, and why in the cover crop selector tool we really had to verify the information with the end in the beginning, considering the termination when you're deciding what to select, because ultimately you do need to get your cash crop established, make money off of that commodity, and also you want the cover crop to do its job before you terminate it. So these next slides are going to go into deciding when to terminate, and also practically speaking, some equipment considerations for termination.
So yeah, here's a couple pictures of planting into a lot of biomass. Not ideal, as we've found over the years. Yeah, so when to terminate, I guess, is, every farm's different. I think our farm, what we found is you want to terminate at least 2 weeks prior to planting your cash crop, and get that cover crop incorporated into the soil as much as possible, so that your the soil can start digesting what you've just put in. Um, and uh, and so yeah, sometimes that's again, maybe probably in a perfect world, but if you're 3 weeks out from when you want to plant and it looks like there's a storm coming in, I certainly wouldn't hesitate to terminate then either. Even if maybe you're looking at the cover crop and you're thinking, well, it hasn't really done what I thought it was going to do because we've had a really dry winter. Sometimes once it starts raining, it doesn't stop, and you'll be thankful that you terminated it.
Mhm. This is a picture, an example of a mower effectively kind of terminating a lot of biomass in one pass. A brassica, a very tall brassica, and then a really cut down a mower can be very effective.
Yeah, here's a couple other pictures of kind of what to expect, or what it can look like after you've gone through and mowed. The picture on the right was done with a Joker disc that's got some disc blades on the back that kind of help reshape the bed. Um, yeah, we can go next. And this is, I guess, I thought this picture was important because it kind of shows what you can get back to after you've had all of the biomass incorporated. This is a field where we were planting corn. It's actually the same field that had that blend of oats and daikon radish and peas and vetch in it that we showed you earlier. And so I guess the takeaway is, not to be scared of planting cover crops, because ultimately the idea is to get, you know, back to what one might consider a normal row crop system, where it's the beds are clean, and you can plant into moisture.
And just to comment on managing residue in the fields, these are two options for that. One is a strip tiller that this is can be used in the beds, but in this case is set up right behind the tires. It cleans up residue in the field and can help simplify operations. This does kind of work the soil as a little tillage device. Or if you don't want to work the soil in the middle and you just want to mow it, this is a furrow mower that just chops the residue in the field and can be helpful for furrow irrigation because you don't have loose soil there that you're moving through that'll run off. So some equipment coming up on how to terminate effectively with soil health in mind.
So yeah, here's some pieces of equipment that we use probably on a regular basis. One of them is called a yetter. Actually, I think that's a yetter in both pictures.
Mhm.
One's from Phil Foster's farm and one's from our farm. And a lot of these pieces of equipment that you'll see have kind of the same principles, in that there's a lot of cutting going on. There's a lot of self-cleaning, And there's a lot of speed is key to having a lot of these different pieces of equipment work. Here we go next. Yeah. Yeah, so that's a ripper stripper, and we love this tool for those of you that have drip in the center of a 60-inch bed. It won't work because it's got a big kind of chisel point there. This is a vertical tillage tool, but it does an amazing job of kind of leaving that space that you're going to plant your cash crop in super nice conditions.
This is another example of a vertical tillage tool with an undercutting knife on it. So it has kind of two sets of discs and can chop and press residue into the soil. And then the undercutting knife is effective at really smoothly terminating the cover crop and making sure it doesn't pop back up after and become a problem in the field. And then this is a power harrow. A harrow does definitely disturb the soil, but in this case, it can shallowly incorporate a lot of residue on the bed tops without doing a deep disturbance. And so it can be really helpful if you have a lot of residue and you need to plant something and you need to kind of get that cleaned up. It has rotating tines that incorporate that biomass on the top.
Yeah, and this is one of our Lillistons with the same thing like Sarah was describing, a full bed knife on the front. And something else that I'm not sure, well, I guess we're going to probably cover it in the next slide. But no, yeah, again, speed works. Having the right amount of moisture in the soil is key because without that moisture, you're not going to be able to, that cover crop is not going to start decomposing as well. So making sure that you're hitting that field at the right time is very important. Yeah, so the horse joker disc, and this is a specialized piece of equipment, and not everyone needs this to be able to incorporate uh, cover crops. We actually found on some of our own ground that even a simple like 15-foot disc works fine, just as long as you're coming back timely to reshape the beds and trying to hold the moisture. I don't want people to get discouraged that, well, if I'm going to plant cover crops, I need all this specialized equipment. That's certainly not the case. And then, yeah, flail mower. Again, nothing too special about it. We use it on, after at the end of harvest, whether it's corn or rice. And then we also use it in the spring to help terminate cover crops. And this is just an example of like that sun hemp crop that we showed earlier. So we hit it once with the flail mower, and then this is the second pass with the joker disc. And I thought it's just a neat example of, what it can look like after a summer cover crop.
Mm-hmm. The equipment that we showed is it has been used in annual systems. I guess in a perennial system, one consideration is you don't necessarily need as much time for digestion. And in an annual system, you want to terminate your cover crop so that biomass can break down, so that your soil is not too hot when you plant and you don't have too much biological activity that might also digest your newly planted corn seed or your tomato transplant, for example. But in a perennial system, you don't have that same consideration. So I guess I'll just share that since I know we have some perennial growers on the meeting. One other great no-till residue management option is
Animals.
Animals. Animals. We're not going to go into too many details on animals, but multi-species is great for the animal diet. And then just kind of our last picture slide before we go into our conclusions. When things go wrong with termination, what can happen? This is a field with a tomato transplant here on the left, planted into a clover mix. The grower attempted a no-till termination with the roller crimper, and the cover crop popped right back up and really did kind of drown out those tomatoes. So one great thing that they had done was just to start small. They only did it with one pass of the roller, and so they still were able to get a good tomato crop on the rest of the field. Definitely, if you're experimenting with termination, you're not sure how it's going to go, and you want to try no-till, for example, or something else like that, definitely encourage you to try it out, but maybe try it out in a smaller area just in case, because at the end of the day, you do have to terminate that cover crop and get your cash crop in the ground in an annual system. So now some conclusions.
So yeah, I guess key takeaways, right? Pick a cover crop that you can manage in the spring. That's probably the most important takeaway. There's so many different cover crops that you can choose, but if you can't deal with it in the spring, then you're just going to set yourself up for failure. Terminate cover crop and establish cash crop, biomass, yeah, the digestion, more residue in the spring, more tillage, um, high volume of high carbon residue in a wet spring is the worst case scenario. Yeah, that one speaks hits close to home. We've definitely had some train wrecks with high carbon residue in a wet spring. That's yeah, it's just a recipe for a disaster. Um, yeah, and then legumes do, they break down faster. They just are really farmer friendly. Um, and then yeah, we started planting in the multi-species for the sheep. Sometimes we'll graze the multi-species, but that's kind of like for a whole nother webinar probably.
Yeah, cool. Next
Yeah,
one.
we're
Yeah,
good.
okay. And then these are just some final words of wisdom from Brian and a couple other growers who do a lot of cover cropping. For newer cover crop growers who are getting started, don't be afraid to try something. Don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good, and be easy on yourself if things go wrong. Plan in advance and give yourself time. Ultimately, you have to make money. Ultimately, that's especially important for termination. And then many of the benefits are not quantifiable, like insect activity. We showed pictures of some of the animals and other biology that can be on your farm, as well as water moving off the farm, the benefit from root exudates and kind of that living system. Don't get yourself into a high biomass situation if you're not prepared to manage it. And then finally, if you are trying to manage a lot of biomass and you run into a dead end, look at your equipment yard and see what you have that can help you figure it out. So that's what we've got here. We have some QR codes with different resources. The cover crop species selector that I showed is here. The Western Cover Crops Council resources page is here. This is a new document from last year, I think, or the year before, on cover cropping in a water scarce environment in California. Some project summaries on my website that have different observations of different trials that I've done, and then a cost study that can be helpful to see what different operations are used in a Sacramento Valley annual rotation. I co-wrote that with Margaret Lloyd, our small farms advisor in the area, so it's really relevant for operations of many different sizes. And with that, we can jump into any questions.
Thank you so much for that great presentation. It was so helpful to sort of see both the big picture and the little tips. I have an initial question that has to do a little bit with the process. So as part of this presentation, you talked about the importance of choosing a cover crop, planting the cover crop, deciding when to terminate the cover crop, and then terminating the cover crop. And then I think, Brian, you talked about waiting at least 2 weeks before planting your cash crop. And I'm wondering if you could talk about that 2 week period and why it's so important to wait 2 weeks before you plant your cash crop.
Yeah, for sure. So there's a lot of activity going on in the soil of everything trying to break down what was just incorporated. And so we found that if we try to come and plant right after we've incorporated, we are exposing ourselves to problems, whether it's, wireworm or cutworm, or the crop kind of not getting the attention from maybe the microbes that it deserves as they are busy. The first thing that they're going to tackle is that they're going to want to decompose what was just given to them before they start taking care of the cash crop. So in our experience, we've just found that letting that soil digest what was just incorporated is super important.
I love that phrasing, letting the soil digest what was just incorporated before putting in your cash crop. Sarah, did you have anything to add to that before I bump it to Grace for
No,
the
I
next
think that
question?
really covered it.
Thanks.
Thanks, Sarah and Brian. That was a great presentation. There's lots of gratitude for both of you in the chat. Um, I want to ask a question that takes us back to a topic from the beginning of your presentation, asking about cover crops per time of year. The question is cover cropping generally considered to be a winter thing? I know, Brian, you mentioned that you all are doing some cover cropping, but wondering if, there are farmers who are starting out with cover cropping, if you have any recommendations for timing and considerations there with water availability.
Mm.
So yeah, I think it depends on your system, right? Everyone's different and everyone has cash crops that are planted maybe a different time of year. But any time that you can effectively plant a cover crop that's maybe not during your cash crop season, that's that's the best. Ultimately, like for ourselves, we've just found that if we can have something living on the ground as many days out of the year as possible, that's a win. That's going to ultimately improve our soil, and our whole system. So, like for ourselves, the majority of our cash crops are in the summer, and that's why we are, you know, predominantly a winter cover crop type cover crops, right? That's why it's mostly vetch and peas and radish and stuff like that. So I don't know if that answers your question or not on the timing of things, but that's, yeah, in a nutshell, how our farm works.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree with what Brian said. I mean, the term cover crop by definition kind of explains what the point of it is. It's really to cover the soil and keep, provide that added benefit of soil armor. In addition, it provides that living root. So I think one cool opportunity in our area that I know Brian has tried, and I'm always interested in learning more about where we can squeeze that in, is that summer fallow period after a summer harvest, really before a winter cover crop can establish when the soil is still bare. But as much as you can keep it living root covered, it's going to do wonders for soil health.
Great, thanks so much. The next question is coming from a perennial farmer, and they're asking, are there cover crops that come back year after year, or do we need to replant every year if we're in a perennial system? I know y'all work more in annual systems, but I wondered, Sarah, if you had some thoughts on that, or Brian.
Yeah, I know that there's like a UC publication on annual reseeding clover. So it's not a perennial clover, but it comes back year after year. So you establish it once and then you have it as like a cover crop in your field. There are definitely perennials like, alfalfa is a perennial, or other ground covers that can be used, but a lot of the perennial species that are recommended would be probably found under like NRCS ground covers rather than cover crops, or typically often annual species. But so yes and no, I think is kind of the answer. But there are opportunities for perennial growers for sure. Certainly more than you would ever have in an annual system. Yeah.
Thanks.
That's great. Um, all right, let's see. The question that I was going to add. Okay, so this is about seed inoculation. So if you've already planted the cover crop and it is still in the baby, not true leaf stage, can this farmer add the inoculant after and this is specifically for crimson clover.
I um I have never heard of it, but I think the main challenge is that you're going to need the um kind of rhizobia in contact with the root zone, so it'd be kind of hard if you sprinkle it on top. But if it's not usually that expensive. If you can try it, you could try to sprinkle it on top and see if it works. It might be worth it, but I've never heard of that, so it's hard to say.
Yeah, that's a tough one. I guess my first thought would be to put it into a solution if
Mhm.
possible. Get it to where you can spray it on. But I can't say that I've ever done it. So yeah,
Let us know how it goes.
right.
Report back, please.
Thank you.
Great. Thanks. Thanks. I think maybe Grace, I'm wondering if this should be our last question for the Q&A, or do you think we have time for two more? Okay. So we'll hold this as our last question for this part of the Q&A, and then we'll open up our office hours starting at 1:15. But this person says they're new to doing cover crops. What is the best equipment for terminating, say, a mustard? If someone's just starting out, what are some of the core pieces of equipment you recommend they have? They added, we have a basic tiller and mower options, but the cutter bar to set at the right depth to terminate is a little bit of a gray area for us, is what they said. But what are the best starting equipment pieces you think are needed for cover crops, people starting out with cover crops?
Mhm.
Yeah, I would say, so a good mower that is going to make the pieces as small as possible. And sometimes that might also even mean running slower, to give time for, that mustard to stay in that chamber where the knives are at to get cut up into the smallest pieces possible. And then if they have a light disc, I'm again kind of a fan of promoting that for people that are starting out, as long as they have a piece of equipment that they can come in after they've dissed it and reshape the beds. Again, and I don't know if this particular grower is planting on, 60-inch beds or 80-inch beds or 30-inch beds, but or maybe they're planting flat. And then it would be, lightly disking it and then maybe rolling it just to, you want to seal that moisture in after incorporating that cover crop so that again, there's that soil to residue contact.
Yeah.
Thanks. Thanks so much. I might just throw in one more little question because I see we have another minute. And that is some of the folks in this webinar are going to be much smaller scale where they're primarily working with hand tools. Do you have any thoughts around working with cover crops in a space where you may not have access to sort of powerful equipment? Do you think it's just as good to, let's say, harvest the cover crop and compost it and then apply it later as a compost? Or what are your thoughts working at a much smaller scale? Do you have any insights there?
The first time I ever saw a cover crop was actually when I was working on an urban farm in Oakland and we were hand managing. We used fava because it was easier. You could just really easily kind of cut it down with your hand versus something with a lot of biomass that's like kind of overwhelming. Fava is sort of one or two stalks, you cut it. And we would just cut it into short, maybe 2 to 3 inch pieces and either leave it on the top or put it in the compost bin. I think that leaving it on the top of the bed is brings a lot of benefit because it's less work, but you can also get kind of that mulch layer, but also ultimately you are trying to grow carbon and nitrogen in place if you're doing a legume or just carbon in place if you're doing a non-legume. So I'm a fan of letting it kind of break up in the bed instead of moving it to the compost bin, managing then reapplying. So I'm a fan of that, but I do have some experience with the hand termination piece, and I definitely think, yeah, trying to find something that's not going to be overwhelming at the end and that is easy to like mustard is like hard to cut through. Triticale, that it's like a lot of material in a grass, but fava bean was pretty easy.
Makes sense.
Great. Sorry to cut you off, Brian.
No, nope, she nailed it.
Awesome. Great. Well, thank you so much. I'm going to ask Grace to put up our closing slides. So we want to thank you, Sarah and Brian, for that great presentation, for answering all those questions. For you in the webinar or you online, if you want to learn more about Sarah and Brian, you can visit their websites. Next week, we're going to be talking about managing pests and diseases organically. And shortly, in a couple of minutes' time, we'll start the office hours to continue to ask Sarah and Brian questions. So this concludes sort of the formal part of our webinar series.